And welcome to our second Whiteboard Wednesday video of 2023. Today I'm going to be talking about digital transformation, answering your questions. If you guys watched the Whiteboard video from a couple of weeks ago, there's a bunch of comments and questions that came in through there. We're going to be breaking down the individual elements from the Digital Transformation Foundational Principles Whiteboard video from 2 weeks ago. That'll be linked up here somewhere that you can click on the link and watch that video if you want to. Today I'm going to be answering a bunch of questions from a bunch of other videos. And I'm going to be responding to a unified namespace discussion in the Discord server. A couple of just quick announcements. At 4.0 Solutions, we are going to be, some members of the community have requested that we put together a workshop that essentially teaches stakeholders, internal champions at manufacturers, systems integrators, and OEMs on like how to get over the hump for digital transformation. So like, how do I know that I need to start with education. I know I need to start with digital transformation maturity assessment. I know I need to start with strategy, architecture, and minimum technical requirements. But I'm having trouble selling that internally in my organization. Generally, that's not a huge hump to get over. Depending upon where the mindset is in the organization, it's not a huge hump. But for some people, it's a challenge. For some organizations, it's a challenge to get over that initial hump. So what's been asked is that we put together a workshop to essentially provide a document and some instructions on what stakeholders a tool stakeholders can use to basically act as a lever to get this process started. That workshop's going to take place towards the end of February. Alan Ramsey, who is our digital transformation maturity assessment specialist, is going to be doing that workshop. Cheryl and those guys should have more information on it. I think it will be incredibly valuable for anyone who's having trouble making the case for starting digital transformation with like this parallel approach: education, okay, architecture and strategy, and solving problems, where they are evolving at the same rate. Okay, the digital transformation maturity assessment's all about that. Okay, and one of the things that we talk about internally in our organization all the time is, does anyone ever succeed if they don't start with strategy, architecture, and MTR? And where do they come from? They come from digital transformation maturity assessment. The answer is no. All right. So with that, that's the big announcement. There's a couple of other workshops that we're going to be doing that have come by request. We're going to be announcing all of them in the next week. So we have workshops and educational content that's going to be. We're doing the advanced MES bootcamp, and we're doing a couple of other ones, especially one on how to leverage ChatGPT for Industry 4.0, which I'll be teaching. But those are workshops that are going to go all the way through, I think, June. So we basically built out the workshop curriculum between now and June, and everything will be announced here in the next month. All right, with that, let's get into the questions. All right, so digital transformation, answering your questions. I'm your host with the most, Walker D. All right, so a lot of great comments. Like I really appreciate all the comments that we get on the videos. I don't know if you guys actually read the comments in the videos, but they are there's a lot of really incredibly insightful comments on there. And it's much easier, I think, when someone asks a really good question. I think it's way more valuable to just answer it in video. And obviously I can make each of these answers their own video, but I don't really see the point in that. I think, maybe once a month or once every fourth whiteboard video, maybe we'll be answering questions. So that's what we're doing here. So in the video that we posted just in the last couple of weeks, finding good people, building a strong team for digital transformation, the importance of shared values. An anonymous user said, why do you spend so much time attacking fellows and rivals when you are clearly aggressive? Okay. I don't know if I would agree that I'm an aggressive person. I would say I'm passionate. I don't know if I'm necessarily aggressive. Anybody who knows me knows that I can't fight my way out of a wet paper bag. So, I may be a really strong guy. I'm a great power lifter. I may have lots of physical strength and I'm good with words. But I don't know if I'm necessarily aggressive. But my response to this guy was, and generally I don't respond to anyone who uses like anonymous handles, but the whole point here was to get people to stop using anonymous usernames. So I said, I don't actually see anyone as a rival. And I don't know if anyone really knows this, but I don't see people as competitors or rivals. I see us all as colleagues who must hold one another accountable. I think this is one of the biggest problems I've had in our industry. We see this all across social organizations. Like one of our biggest problems in policing is that law enforcement agencies have done a very poor job of holding one another accountable internally. And so because they don't hold one another accountable internally, the impact on the general public or the consumer got to the point where it was, violent and was hurting people. And so now the consumer and the general public is holding law enforcement accountable. Teachers do the same thing. Teachers unions, they don't hold themselves accountable. So it's sort of like the mentality is, never say a bad word or a critical word about anyone who you might need sometime in the future. I think that's absurd. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. I think people should judge me based on the content of my character and my contribution to society, not whether or not I scratch your back and you scratch mine. So I look at all members in our organization, all other influencers, other Industry 4.0 influencers. I look at other integrators. I look at other engineers, software developers. I see them all as colleagues. I don't see them as rivals. So I am critical of people who I think are doing things wrong. But if I'm ever critical of someone, I always give them the opportunity to come defend themselves. I always say, you're welcome to come on the podcast and tell me where I'm wrong. I can defend my positions. I can tell you why it is I believe transparency and pricing is important. I can tell you why I think it's important that when you're building digital media, what you're asking yourself is, how does my audience benefit? You're not focused on how you benefit. I can make the argument for why that's a good thing. So, and I think that's specifically what this guy was talking about in this comment, which was, why are you picking on these other influencers? Well, the answer is because I don't think they're providing any value, and they could. So and I tell them this to their face. It's not like I only tell them, I only say this kind of stuff on a podcast. I don't. I do it two ways. I go to the person, and then I also do it publicly. Okay. But I said, I don't see anyone as a rival, and I see us all as colleagues who must hold one another accountable, all in service of the mission, which is to save and create middle-class jobs. And this specific person, user CC2OK70J3Z, hides behind anonymous username. I'm out here for anyone to critique me. And by the way, I engage with people who do critique. I go right at them because I know I can defend my positions. I encourage you to do the same. So take a position, defend it transparently and in the open. Okay. That's my position. Yes, do I critique people who I see as colleagues? Absolutely. The people I don't critique are those who can't defend themselves, for sure. Like, if you're, I pick on Rockwell Automation all the time, right? Do you know that, still no one has ever defended Rockwell. Moreover, there are people who actually have worked at Rockwell, who were currently employed at Rockwell, who reached out to me privately if you look at over the course of our videos where I would say things about Rockwell's business practices and how they're, letting down the community and all this kind of stuff. They operate like the mafia sometimes. There were the occasional Rockwell employee who would reach out to me, okay, and say I was being unfair. Most of the time they were new. Most of the time they were only been at Rockwell maybe a year and a half. I would always ask them that. In each case, there were 3 different people. In each case, all 3 of them came back later and said I was right. Right? Rockwell should be able to come on here and defend why they operate the way they do. Why don't they? Because they can't benefit from it. That's the reason. Whoever's in their marketing group will say only something bad can come from this. Why? Because he's right. The shit we're doing, our customers are not going to like. They're not going to be happy with what our motivations are. They're not going to be happy with our approach. So if we go out and we try to defend it and he calls us on it, we're going to look stupid. That's the reason they don't come on our podcast. Okay. And by the way, a lot of Rockwell people who work for Rockwell contact us at 4.0 Solutions and Intellic Integration and tell us we're right. A lot. And I could bring on our business development people, our account managers, bring them on and say, listen, I agree with you 100%, especially about the stuff you say about my company. Okay. All right. The next question. And we'll get into the technical stuff now. So integration mafia. So in the video where I was talking about picking the right integrator partners, this guy, Bruce B, 85, asked, how do you bill for training the client to become an expert after the integration? All right. So in that video, I talked about basically the two schools of thought in systems integration. There's actually more, but I talked about the two biggest ones. So school of thought number one is the concept of going deep and staying long. Okay, this is the typical integration model. Most of the integrators who are members at like the CSIA, the Control Systems Integrators Association, the CSIA doesn't promote this, but it's something I've seen over and over and over again from members of the organization, which is the concept that we want to be your permanent contract labor. We're your engineering company. And so all the information related to engineering, all of our digital information is something we own. So they don't put comments in their PLC code, that kind of thing, right? Put scareware in their HMIs, that kind of stuff. And the other one is the consultant like us who believes that part of this journey is to educate the client. That is, we have to teach the client how to do CI/CD. We have to teach them how to do what we're doing. Some of the technical skill sets, how to build the teams, how to define the strategies, how to iterate, how to manage a project with agility, how to select your solutions, how to prioritize your solutions, okay? And so that you can do the continuous improvement, continuous development. So the continuous integration, CI, and the continuous development, CD. The end user needs to be able to do that. And Bruce is saying, how do you bill for the training the client to become an expert after the integration? Okay. Education actually starts in the beginning. This is actually a really good question. And I talked about this earlier when I'm talking about this workshop we're doing later in the month, which is we have to teach you how to take a three-pronged approach to digital transformation, right? So how do you educate your organization? Okay. How do you do architecture and strategy? And how do you solve problems all at the same time? So those would be digital solutions, right? How do you educate, strategy and architecture, and solve problems at the same time in parallel with one another? Our strategies are built around achieving that goal, all three. So education starts on day one. And in fact, it starts with the digital transformation maturity assessment. When we are assessing organizations, one of the things that we're doing, one of our goals during the assessment is to educate. So in the 5 cross-functional meetings that we do, so we meet with operations, quality, leadership, engineering, and IT. And we have 90-minute meetings with each of those groups, okay? The beginning of those 90-minute meetings is a 15-minute presentation that everyone gets. It's an educational presentation. What is digital transformation? Why is it important? How can you be successful? What are the risks? Like if you're going to fail, why are you going to fail? Education starts on day one. The other thing that we do, Bruce, is during the development cycle, so that first 12 to 16 weeks where we're doing the first proof of concept, we're doing that proof of concept. If you look at, there's actually this vector drawing we drew that essentially shows the iterations of digital transformation for an organization. And you can break it into phases if you want to. Let's break it into 3 phases. Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Phase 1 is year 1, phase 2 is year 2, phase 3 is year 3, okay? In phase 1, we create one digital transformation scrum team. And that scrum team is made up of people from our organization and people from the end user, the client. If they don't have the resources, they got to hire them, okay? So, and we help them hire them. We help them select the people they're going to put on their team. In that first phase, it's probably something like 80-20, 90-10. We're doing all the work. And they're really learning. We're delegating smaller tasks, smaller development tasks, depending upon aptitude and capability. For some organizations, it might be 50-50. Hell, we had an organization that was 100-0 on day one. I actually talked about them on a previous podcast, where literally all they needed us for was the DTMA, the strategy, the architecture, and the minimum technical requirements, and they just went off running. Okay, they didn't need us to do any development, and all we did was peer review. Okay. But that first phase is generally something like 80-20, 90-10. Our firm is doing the bulk of the work. Phase 2 gets you to more like, say, 50-50. So in year 2, it's we're doing half the work and they're doing the other half. And year 3 would be the completely inverted. We'd be doing 10%, they're doing 90. Okay, that's a really common example. Now, it doesn't always have to be 3 years. A lot of times the turnarounds are 18 months, something like that. So that you break those 3 phases across 18 months, right? So basically 8-month windows, give or take, or 7-month windows, give or take, or 6 to 7 month windows. The 18 to 24 months. Then, depending upon the organization who makes that decision, sometimes they just have one stakeholder internally who essentially owns digital solutions. And they may decide, you know what, we're not going to build our own development team internally, but we're going to have a development resource. And the way that we would bill a client to teach them to become an expert after, say, phase 3, okay, where we're supporting, is generally in some type of service agreement, which is annual. And it may include things like peer reviewing, a certain number of hours dedicated to education for that person, or hardware support, software support, patches, that kind of stuff. But really, really good question. The answer is it does depend, but I hope I gave you enough examples so you understand it. Juni Aro and the OPC Foundation Out of Touch video, he said, why is it that German industry supports OPC UA and standards in general, but the American industry doesn't? Because the vendor lock-in brings more money to the companies. Yeah. So, I mean, fundamentally, German manufacturing is state subsidized. Okay. In the United States, really the only manufacturing that I can think of that's subsidized by the government, that's really subsidized by the government, is the auto industry. And that's because automotive companies grew, the big 3 just grew to the point where they weren't really good at innovation anymore. What it was each entity in the organization became its own bureaucracy. And what is the definition of a bureaucracy? A bureaucracy is when you've grown to the point where the individual entities within your organization's sole purpose is to justify their existence. So their primary focus is just on justifying why they're there. It's not some greater purpose, okay? And this is why automotive companies like Toyota, for example, a really good example with Toyota AI Ventures, Toyota decide, because they couldn't get out of their own way, and when it came to the bureaucracy, what Toyota decided to do, and not just Toyota, Hyundai did the same thing, so did Volkswagen. They created divisions that were outside of the bureaucracy that were designed to innovate. Okay, but the answer is, why do they support OPC UA? It has to do with Beckhoff. Okay, the relationship of Beckhoff to OPC UA, the investment they've made into those standards, and the fact that manufacturing is subsidized by the government. They can afford to not be efficient. Innovation is focused on additional efficiency. Okay, in Germany it's a very protectionist manufacturing environment. In terms of their trade policy, it's very, very protectionist. So that's the reason. I mean, Americans are not good at continuous improvement. We are not good at perfecting processes, but we are damn good at innovating. And that just comes from the culture. The culture where we try to keep a culture of agility for the most part. We're not nearly as restrictive here in the United States as you are in other Western countries that have strong manufacturing sectors. And the more restrictive you are, the more regulations you are, the more regulations you have, the more standards you have. Okay. But there isn't anyone who's arguing that OPC UA is the standard that we should all be using. Which brings me to N. Hibbs' next question. So he said, your comment about OPC UA, does that change with the newer OPC UA pub sub model? That seems to address many of your problems with OPC. Okay, so when we're talking about what is a unified namespace, and what I was saying is that OPC UA is not an IoT protocol. Okay, the answer is no. And for those of you who don't know, there's a new release of OPC UA pub sub part 14. I think it came out in November. I think is when I read it. It added in like 130 new sections in the standard. So I think it went from like 300 and something sections to like 430 sections, something like that. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was a lot. Okay, they added like 130 different sections. There's lots of changes in that standard that came out in November, and there were some improvements in there. And I'm actually going to go over this in a later whiteboard video, because I think what I'm proposing to do in the next whiteboard video is to go over Sparkplug 3.0. So the new release of the Sparkplug specification, which they're calling 3.0, not Sparkplug C, and whereas Sparkplug 2.0, 2.1, 2.2 was basically Sparkplug B, and Sparkplug 1 was Sparkplug A. Now they're changing the naming to Sparkplug 3.0, or they did, which is stupid. But anyway, I'm going to go over that in the next whiteboard video, and I think maybe in the video after that we'll go over OPC UA Part 14, which is pub sub. Okay, has the pub sub standard gotten better with the new updates, which came? I think the previous release was 2018, and the new one was 2022, November 2022. The answer is no. The standard actually got worse. There were some positive changes, but it actually got worse, and here's why. Okay, in a nutshell, for the non-OPC UA expert, if you haven't read the entire standard, the pub sub model, Part 14, is focused on basically using broker technology to create namespaces that are extensions of profiles. So OPC UA profiles. Okay. So Part 14, the pub sub standard for OPC UA, is profile centric. Okay. Not profile centric. Well, it is profile centric. That's the fundamental issue. Okay. People don't build, manufacturers do not build their equipment to certain profiles. They don't start with a standard and build the machine. They build the machine to solve a problem, then try to find a standard that machine fits into. Except in rare cases, like CNC machines, for example. Because a CNC machine is basically multi-axis motion control with tooling. They're all basically the same thing. Okay, multi-axis motion control with tooling, and then you use a numerical coded program to tell the axes where to move and in which order, which steps. You can standardize that, and so the information models, the profiles for, say, a CNC lathe, for example, it's much easier to build a machine to that profile that is going to solve everyone's problem when it comes to machining. But in the rest of manufacturing, that's just not the case. And that isn't the only example. If you go profile centric, what you're doing is you're saying that you have to fit this round peg into this square hole to solve all your unique problems. And occasionally the round peg is going to fit into a round hole. And we're sorry about the square ones. That's basically what you're saying. And that's the reason the problem hasn't been solved with Part 14 pub sub. What we preach is that your digital infrastructure needs to be a manifestation of the reality on the plant floor. The reason I'm a huge fan of, one of the big complaints that people will make about Sparkplug is there isn't enough standardization about how to create your information models. And I say, fucking exactly. Exactly. Okay? That's the point. The point is that my information model for my holding tank may not look the same as your information model for your holding tank, because I'm using sensors you're not using. I'm using materials to build that holding tank you're not using. I have different material requirements that you don't have. Okay. The reality is that the innovation that comes from manufacturing is not in standardization. It's in finding the where everyone else is doing it wrong. And that means you have to depart from the standard. Okay. Excuse me for that. All right. Oguzhan Ukar. So he said, when a machine stops, how can we capture the leading signal from the PLC to understand the root cause of stoppage to use it in the OEE downtime analysis? Because in our case, when there's a machine downtime, within milliseconds, there are several signals that are being sent as an MQTT message from our PLC to our server. How can we distinguish the leading signal from lagging ones? Okay. What he's saying here is, and this is really common in machine alarming, is there's going to be one alarm that indicates what was the reason we stopped. And there are going to be many alarms, 10 additional or 500 additional alarms that are just a result of the fact that we stopped. How can we capture the one alarm that tells us the rising edge, the first alarm? How can we catch that first one that tells us what our actual problem is? And the answer is we solve this 3 ways, okay? Number one, the first place we do it is we do it as logic in the PLC, okay? And that's just really a function of we basically write a subroutine because the PLC is the one that is cycling the fastest. We write a subroutine that picks up the rising edge of those alarms, okay? Which one latched first? That's going to be our reason, okay? Now, obviously, that takes engineering time. It's the most expensive route, okay? The second way we do it is we create an information model, generally in Ignition or frameworks, where what we do is we use code to determine which one was first, okay? So what we try to do is just monitor all of them, and whichever one was the rising edge, we have business logic that determines it. Now, the problem there is that generally, if the lagging alarms, I call them output alarms, but or not antecedent, but descendant alarms. If those alarms are triggering within 1 second, then that business logic in like a platform is not going to be the best approach. Okay. The third way we do it is we do it actually in the field bus layer, where we may create, and this is a really common one. What we'll do is we'll put alarms in the order of hierarchy. So what I'll do is we'll create, say, a data set that says, here are the 500 possible alarms on this machine, okay? And they are in order of importance. And so if I'm stopped, what I'm going to go do is I'm going to go look in my data set for the order of priority, and the first one I run into that is an alarm, that's our reason, okay? So those are the 3 options. When you're talking about this millisecond use case here, most people don't want to hear it. You got to do it on the edge. You got to write up logic on the edge that's going to capture the rising edge of the first alarm that fired. Great question, though. All right. Then he comes at and hits me in the head with a baseball bat. Aguzan says, come on, man. Machine learning wants every tag. That's not right, man. Could you please tell me what the machine learning algorithm does with static data? And the answer is we use static data to define classifications. Okay. The answer is nothing. That's not true. Okay. There's 2 types of machine learning, right? You have basic machine learning where I'm trying to test a hypothesis. Okay. And then I have machine learning algorithms that are looking for patterns that will define what my hypothesis is. Okay. Trying to predict every value y for every value x, standard linear regression, that's easy machine learning. Anybody who graduates with a degree in data science is going to be able to do standard linear regression. Standard linear regression isn't the answer to all manufacturing problems, okay? The real value in machine learning is using machine learning to accurately predict patterns or accurately identify patterns. This is a pattern. We don't know what that pattern is. You need additional work, but this is a pattern, okay? 99% certain that that's a pattern in this data, okay? We have to classify that somehow. And what we do is we use the static stuff, which is, we call that definitional data, definitional or informative, the stuff that rarely or never changes. Static means never changes. So that would be something like the serial number on a machine, right? Or a model number, or the manufacturing date. You can use that information to classify patterns that we see in machine learning models. So that's your answer. The static data that you take from the PLC, which is not changing through the process of the machine, is nothing but a straight line in the multi-dimensional space, which does not have any variance. Agreed. It is a straight line. The problem is that what we're not looking at that straight line. We're looking at the pattern created from 3 straight lines when we look at only those 3 together. Okay, that's a pattern. Whether I'm creating a histogram or whether I'm creating a shape that I'm going to try and match against, I'm using 3 static values to create a shape. Where model number is this, where manufacturing date was that, where installation date was this. That's a shape. Okay. ML algorithms require variance in the data to have predictions. I love your videos. I love what you're teaching about IoT integration, but don't go on machine learning products. I'm not sure this is topics. I appreciate that. I do love the criticism. I'm happy to expand on it even more. I will say this. I was able to take, I do know enough about machine learning that I was able to take a Jetson Nano, a Sony sensor, Sony camera sensor, some stuff that some vision ML programs that we used for a manufacturer, add on a bunch of additional stuff, and accurately predict a world record on the deadlift. And by the way, of the variables that were being consumed by the model, 2/3 of those were static. Okay, so I do think I know. I'm not Jan LeCun, but I would say I'm more educated and experienced in machine learning than the average bear. But I do appreciate the criticism. All right, late bluebird. So this is EV companies stop hiring ex-Tesla engineers. Said it's not a job. It's a job. It's not a war. Okay, and almost all companies have a vision and a mission statement. People leave their jobs every day for many legit reasons. Elon Musk is a greedy and selfish businessman, just like a lot of other bosses. Why do you feel is it only right for him to fire people and you're not allowed to quit a horrible job? Okay, first off, I didn't say any of those things. What I said was stop hiring electric vehicle companies. Stop hiring ex-Tesla engineers. Here's why. The reason that Tesla has been able to do what they've done is they have strong transformational leadership, but they also have the best engineers in the world. Same thing with SpaceX. Elon Musk does not let the A players leave. He gives them the Godfather offer. Okay? If you're an ex-Tesla engineer, Elon doesn't think you're a rock star. He may think you're great. He may think you're an A player. He may think you're awesome. But if he thinks you're a game changer, a transformative talent, if he thinks that you are a talent that could change the world, you work for him. He doesn't let you leave. He figures out whatever the problem is. And he figures out the reason you got to leave. When you said people leave for many legit reasons. Yeah, my wife got a job on the other side of the country, whatever it is, or my husband did. If you're that valuable, he overcomes that barrier. So if you're hiring ex-Tesla engineers, okay, and you're not getting Elon's blessing on that hiring, this is a rock star, then you're hiring the people who didn't make it, who didn't hack it. When you said Elon Musk is a greedy, selfish businessman, just like a lot of other bosses, this couldn't possibly be more further from the truth. Okay, I'm not going to debate that piece, but Elon is anything but greedy and selfish. He's dedicated his entire life to perpetuating humanity. That's literally the opposite of selfishness. He has 10 kids to help repopulate the earth, to do his part to help repopulate the earth. Okay, he overspent on Twitter because of his belief that freedom of speech is foundational to democracy, which it is. Which it is. Look what's happening in Europe. Look what's happening in Canada. You can be sent to jail for words, for things you say. That's fucking absurd. Okay, I don't know who Late Bluebird is, but I'd love for you to come on here. I'll also teach you how to spell vision. All right, there's an edit on the thing. You could have edited and put vision in there. What I wanted to point here is, and that wasn't fair. Maybe English isn't your first language. You're right. Every company has a vision and mission statement. But how many of us have worked for organizations that those are just words on a piece of paper? That when you look at the vision or you look at our core values or you look at our mission, they do not line up with your experience every single day. That was my point. My point is I've worked lots of places where they had all this stuff on paper, but that's not the way we operated. We didn't really give a shit about the customer. You don't really care. Right? There are people out there who do care. I do all of this. Everything I do here is to help save and create middle-class jobs because of my experiences as a kid. I was a kid born, my mom got murdered when I was 7. I grew up in a trailer park, and I just happened to be blessed to be adopted by a family who taught me the 3 pillars of discipline, respect, and hard work, and never allowed me to make excuses for why I failed. So every time I failed, I had to own it. I was blessed, and I grew up in an affluent community with a lot of really smart kids whose parents were professors at Cornell University. And I'm trying to pay all that forward. When I look at all the working class people I grew up with, whose parents lost their jobs because of New York State, I grew up in upstate New York, the policies of the state and the decisions that manufacturers made drove manufacturers away. Manufacturers had to chase cheap labor, and it decimated the middle class. Upstate New York is a fucking wasteland. It is a wasteland. Compared to what it was in the 1980s and the 1970s to what it is today, it is a wasteland. New York State is the laughing joke of the entire country. California is the only state in the country that is a bigger laughingstock than the state of New York. And Chicago is Illinois is a really close third, and then New Jersey. There are people out there who are really trying to have a positive impact on the world. If Elon Musk was so greedy, why the fuck did he give up Tesla's patents before they went public? Come on. Absurd. But if you're a rock star engineer, if you're a real difference maker, Elon doesn't let you go. He figures out what he has to do to get you to stay. What I'm saying is, I did not say ex-Tesla's employees should not be hired because they left. That makes them bad employees. What I said is, because they're not there, they're not rock stars. All right, last conversation here. This is really important. So I haven't even read this at all. I mean, you're going to literally see me go through this on the fly. I've not read this conversation. Cheryl pasted this in. Everyone's been telling me for days that I'm supposed to comment on this conversation. I just haven't gotten to it yet. So Josh posted in the Discord server on the 27th our question of the day, which was, how do you ensure the scalability and flexibility to accommodate future growth and changes in your organization when digitally transforming? Okay, so here's how I would answer. I would focus on technology first, that is a technological infrastructure. One that eliminates all of the integration layers. Number 2, I would have a project management strategy that is designed to capture problems or that is built on the idea that what we want is a function of what we know, and digital transformation is about exponentially increasing what we know. So therefore, what we want is going to change exponentially. Okay. Number 3, I would have a team. I would build a team that was really good at prioritizing our new problems and solving them on that technological infrastructure in short bursts, 2 weeks, 4 weeks. Okay. That's my answer. I would use a unified namespace. I would use a 3-sentence digital strategy. I'd use primarily MQTT as my infrastructure. And I would write minimum technical requirements that mandated that our vendors, future vendors, all meet these minimum technical requirements before they install a smart thing. If not, they got to add in money for us to build a gateway in between. That's my answer. Ryan Kershaw said, good infrastructure and culture. Good infrastructure like a UNS provides the ability to scale and flex. Good culture provides the willingness to scale and flex. I like it. Kurt Anderson, I think that's the guy from Libre. He said, a unified namespace unfortunately doesn't provide scale for an enterprise. It provides scale for a SCADA system. If your intent is to truly digitally transform at the enterprise level, how do you propose that your infrastructure will provide the context, API access, and iterative application development to do that at a scale? So I already explained that up above, but I'll say this. One of the things that it's really important to understand about the unified namespace, I talk about this all the time, is that it's omniscient and omnipresent. What you're doing is you're basically, I don't want to use the term mesh, okay? because people say data mesh or whatever it is, and the definition of data mesh is not what I'm talking about here. But think about the business. If we were to look at our business in 2 dimensions, so level 0, level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, level 5, right? As we go up, our whole business can fit on a piece of paper. That piece of paper is the mesh on which the unified namespace sits. Okay, and that unified namespace is omniscient and omnipresent. No matter where you are on that piece of paper, you can access the structure of the business and all the events, plus all the smart things that are in each of the layers can consume and publish back into that unified namespace. So I can consume events from my PLC. I can, one of the smart things at, say, level 3, the MES system can consume events. It can calculate OEE, and then it can publish the OEE value back onto that mesh, onto that unified namespace that anything can access. Okay? If you make it 3-dimensional, then what you want to do is you want to imagine that you put a layer on top that's basically consuming that unified namespace as we move up the stack, and we're adding in context and we're consuming it back down to the bottom. That's the most important thing. Anything on that piece of paper has access to that data and information and context. That's how you do it at scale. I mean, this is all we've been doing. I mean, this is how we've been doing it since 2013. The unified namespace is the infrastructure. It absolutely scales at an enterprise level. And all of our clients would read that comment and be like, well, clearly Kurt probably doesn't understand it in terms of the way that I just said it. Okay. So Josh said, UNS is not deterministic. It's omniscient and omnipresent. It's layered and distributed. So layered would be those layers going up the piece of paper. Distributed would be the piece of paper in the background, where if I'm anywhere on that piece of paper or that mesh, I have access to the unified namespace, the structure, and the events. Creating a mesh across an organization with many entry and consumption points, all on common access technology. UNS is not a theory, it's a practice. It is reality. It is the architecture that the largest organizations in the world use to digitally transform. We have hundreds of examples. Good response, Josh. Kurt Anderson, point me to those enterprise instances, please. Just customer and site location will be sufficient. Also, a simple architecture diagram and a list of the products that you use for historical access to contextualized time series and what master schema you use to form the API. We're not creating an API. We're using nodes. We're using nodes that meet minimum technical requirements. Those minimum technical requirements. He said an API is an application programming interface. Okay. An API is, let's say I make a piece of software, and my piece of software has, software is basically built in 3 layers. You have backend, which is where all the data is stored. It's a database. Then you have an API, application programming interface, and then you have a UI. And let's say I built an application in iOS, for example, or let's say I built it in Java. That's exactly how Java is going to, you're going to build your application. The difference is that if I were to put a square around what is Java, it would be the API and it would be the UI, right? So I may have Swing for my UI, right? And then I have the Java libraries that allow me to access, say, a MySQL backend, which would then access my MySQL database, right? And that would make up my application. He's still thinking in terms of that the API and backend layer are unique to each of the applications, but they're not. They may have their own, but what you do is in your application, you add a piece to your API that can reconcile common structure and events from a MQTT broker namespace to the master data model that's running in your application. And that's the MTR, the minimum technical requirements. Oh yeah, and also what kind of query performance do you see when you ran MES queries across the distributed unified namespace? Well, I mean, like the largest application, so the largest UNS, so if I access a unified namespace, the largest UNS that I've ever seen is probably in the 100 million topic range. Okay? So that is, if I were to look at all the nodes, there's 100 million topics. But a topic can contain or the payload of a topic could, in theory, contain a JSON, a JavaScript object notation, basically a dictionary, that if I parsed it by a consumer, it would give me, hundreds more topics and values. Okay. This is where the architect comes in, right? In terms of the enterprise instances, please, I'm happy to have that call with Kurt. I mean, in some cases, we can just share. We do it all the time in Mastermind. I mean, people have seen this. We have 400, 500 members in mentorship and a couple hundred members in Mastermind who have seen examples of this many times, but it's only from the companies that allow us to show their backends. Historical access is generally maintained by a node that is consuming from the event engine, which is the UNS. And the master schema is basically based on, so the master schema would be ISA 95, enterprise site area line cell, and then you have basically 4 types of namespaces. You have a functional namespace, you have a descriptive namespace, an informative namespace, an ad hoc namespace. Ad hoc is the one where you would have to create some type of custom consumer from the namespace, because this isn't predefined, right? Ad hoc could be something like an engineer on a plant floor decided to create a namespace that's got, say 8 or 9 parameters, and then say an informative namespace that's got maybe 12 outputs, and they're all context, right? All right, Mariano B said, hello, I work as a plant control engineer. My plant is starting to have a digital infrastructure. We use multiple OPCs to collect data, InfluxDB for time series, Grafana for visualization. So everything he talked about here, so from OPC to Influx is integration, from Influx to Grafana, especially, well, if let's say you're using Telegraph between Influx and Grafana, that would be like a native integration, but let's say it's not, then you got integration from Influx to Grafana. Node-RED to handle which data the OPCs to put into which Influx table, and some processing. I think that in a way we got digital because now everyone in the plant uses Grafana to analyze and make decisions, even the managers. Very good. How do you automatically collect all the data from the PLCs? We have S7 400s and 300s. It's going to be a challenge with the 300s. And we have to manually collect the data with OPC, and with Node-RED send it to Influx for historization. It would be a lot of work to map all the data just in case we need it. Okay. So the answer is, and I'm going to use the S7 500, not the 400 and 300 as the example. I have an actual use case, S7 500. So there are 2 ways to do it. Number one, we use the S7 500. There's an MQTT function block that was developed by somebody in Brazil that we installed. We had basically 220 S7 500 PLCs. Okay. No, we had 440. There was 2 for each node. We started by just taking an MQTT block that we could basically install in each. We just update the program. But what we ended up deciding to do was we ended up putting a little edge PC. This costs about $800 per unit. We put in an edge PC, a little Advantech Uno, that was running a headless Linux operating system, and it was running an Ignition Edge that was only using the Siemens driver. So it was a native Siemens driver to Ignition Edge. Okay. That gave us, then we were able to just drop in we were able to just browse and drop all the raw namespace from the PLC into Ignition. Then what we did was we wrote an MQTT transmitter for Sparkplug B in Python. We didn't buy one because it was going to be too expensive. We just wrote it from scratch. Okay. And then we called it from that Ignition instance, the Edge instance. We called the Python package. And what it did was it consumed, what we did was we created the Sparkplug definitions for device and group. Okay. And node ID. And then what we did was all we had to do was give it a node ID and an IP address that it needed to publish to. And then Ignition would just call the transmitter. It would read the mapping from the PLC. It would drop that edge, all that device mapping into the edge, and then transmit it to a broker. And then all we did was we repeated at each. We literally got to the point where the engineers for the customer, they would go out, they would connect that Advantech Uno to the network, and they would run a script. They would call a script from the cloud that would then run everything to set everything up the way that we want. We didn't do containers at this time. And every time they install a new rig, they just run through that process. And literally the entire namespace in the PLC is mapped to MQTT and published into the namespace. All right. And then John Patanian answered. He said, it's not expensive to use Ignition to do the tag mapping. At scale, I use built-in Python scripting to import and export tags into the platform. Ignition could consume your OPC tags and map them into a new space. This is literally what we did. For hysterizing, you can either use external influx DB history module for Ignition or use the transmission module to publish the new namespace back to the broker, and then use another tool such as Node-RED to write as Node to read to write to InfluxDB. Okay. All right. Next whiteboard video. So what I'm thinking is that I want to do Sparkplug 3.0. So what I'd like for you to do is comment, well, like on this video, subscribe if you're not subscribed, and then comment down below. That really helps the algorithm. And let me know if you want me to cover Sparkplug 3.0. So basically what I would do is I would literally go through the new spec at a high level. Let's try to do it in 30 minutes, give or take. This video took 51 minutes is where we are. I had no idea it would take this long. Do Sparkplug 3.0, where I would show the deltas between Sparkplug 2.2, which was the latest version, Sparkplug 3, which is the changes, specifically the incorporations of MQTT5. But then the last of the whiteboard video would be, what is Sparkplug B and how does it work and why does it matter? I think another really good whiteboard video after that would be to answer the question, how do we use MQTT3, native MQTT3, MQTT5 namespaces right alongside Sparkplug topical namespaces? I think that would be the next one. So like, subscribe, comment down below. Let me know what you think about the next whiteboard video. Also, is this too long? Okay, is a 50-minute whiteboard video, educational whiteboard video, too long? And if so, if it is too long, where should we cap the video at? 20 minutes, whatever. Because these whiteboard videos are not going to really be edited. They're going to be edited moderately, but we're not going to go through and do the full editing because we're supposed to teach them, treat them as like a class lesson. Okay. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.